The Fugitive Slave Law of 1850 was one of the 5 laws passed during the Compromise of 1850 to reduce tensions between the North and the South. This act functioned by requiring the capture and return of any escaped slaves, regardless of whether or not they were in a free state. The effect of this law on the abolition of slavery was varied, as it both helped and hindered the abolition of slavery. While it may have strengthened the enforcement of slavery, it also brought national attention to the issue, making it an even more important topic of debate and thus change. Alice Malivasic argues that the Fugitive Slave Law of 1850 was destined to fail from the moment it was enacted. She explains that the growing alliances between African Americans and abolitionists created strong networks of resistance that challenged the enforcement of the law, especially in the northern states. Malivasic also draws a connection between enslaved people seeking freedom in the 19th century and modern-day immigrants facing similar struggles for safety and human rights. In addition, she examines the human impact of slavery, using examples such as slave auctions to reveal the emotional and moral consequences of the law.
Connor Lennon's research shows that the Fugitive Slave Act of 1850 had a clear economic impact on slavery. By prompting people to capture and return escapees, the act reduced the risk of fleeing, which in turn increased the market value of enslaved people, leading to prices to rise by as much as 35% in some northern states. It is noted that this enforcement strengthened enslavers' presumed property rights, especially those in border states, which made slavery more secure and profitable. However, the act did spark resistance. Abolitionists and free states passed personal liberty laws to counter it, and events like the Oberlin-Wellington Rescue of 1858 demonstrate direct organized defiance. This study highlights how the Fugitive Slave Act didn't just enforce existing laws, but reshaped the economics of slavery while fueling tensions that contributed to the Civil War.
Kevin McMullen examines the Fugitive Slave Law of 1850 and explains Walt Whitman's response to it. He describes how the law, a major part of the Compromise of 1850, created a national system for tracking, capturing, and returning escaped enslaved people to their enslavers. The law also required American citizens to help enforce it, meaning anyone could be obligated to act as a slave catcher. McMullen notes that Whitman opposed the law, not necessarily because of its impact on slavery, but because he believed it represented federal overreach into state affairs and threatened the balance of power in the nation.
The biggest effects that the Fugitive Slave Law had was obviously on the African Americans in the United States. At the time, African Americans would seek freedom by escaping the South and migrating to the North. This angered the South as they were losing their slaves little by little and called for Congress to pass the Fugitive Slave Law. The idea seemed simple to Congress in the South: return slaves that went to the North back to the South. However, they soon realized a difficult problem. How would it be possible to track the South's slaves and catch the right people? The solution was honestly just to guess. The plan was to hold trials for caught slaves, and if proven guilty of fleeing, they would be sent back to the South. The problem was that capturers soon realized that there was no way to correctly identify a captured person as a slave or a freed man in court. Therefore, a lot of times they would do random captures to whichever African Americans they could find. Capturers would simply claim that an African American is a slave and the judge would accept, causing free African Americans to become scared of being falsely accused, and even they were not safe from being sent to the South. The primary source displays African Americans running from white capturers, but the image leaves it to the viewers to guess if they are slave escapees or free men. Without knowing anything about the men, capturers would immediately assume they were slave escapees and send them to the unjust courts and most likely be sent to the South. Not only did the Fugitive Slave Law affect the African Americans in America, it even impacted the northern citizens. The abolition of slavery has already begun in the North, which is why so many slaves would flee towards the North for freedom. Then, the Congress of the United States announces a nationwide law that even they must go against their ideology and are now forced to capture quote-unquote slaves as well. Thus began the fight between the northern states, who argued that this law was an overreach by the federal government against its own citizens, and the southern states, who just wanted slaves. On this primary source, we can see how this law has turned into such a catalyst for political division in the country. This map was made by Republicans, and its purpose was to illustrate the difference between the North and South. It displays how the North, or free states, are superior in things such as capital, railroads, and more population per square mile, and etc., compared to the South, or slave states. The division between the law and how it was implemented affected the people of the United States, both African American and white, and was a big factor in the war against slavery. This tension led to an even greater resentment of slavery in the North.
The author, Kevin McCullen, noted that Walt Whitman, a famous poet, once wrote that fugitive slaves must be returned, which suggests that Whitman initially supported the Fugitive Slave Act. However, McCullen also explains that Whitman later removed this statement as he developed more sympathy towards escaped slaves. This suggests that Whitman may not have fully supported slavery, but rather was experiencing a personal conflict as his views evolved. This evidence is considered controversial because it relies on assumptions about Whitman's character and beliefs. Different people may interpret his actions differently, so not everyone will agree with McCullen's interpretation. In conclusion, the Fugitive Slave Law of 1850 both helped and hindered the abolition of slavery. The enforcement of slavery led to a growing resistance in the North, as even free states were required to aid in the capture and return of slaves. This resistance eventually led to the development of alliances between abolitionists and African Americans, which would be a driving factor behind the eventual abolition of slavery. The political stance of this law was also questioned, as many viewed it as a federal overreach into state affairs.